I like big books, and I cannot lie. Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne. Today I have big book recommendations for my August prompt for reading the classics challenge. The August prompt is to read a book that is 500 plus pages, which is everybody's favorite, right? Or not. I particularly chose that prompt to coincide with the Big Book Challenge, which is a reading challenge that takes place every summer and is hosted by Sue Jackson. And the idea is to read a book that is 400 plus pages or more. I upped the ante a little bit to 500 plus pages. The secondary level of this challenge is to read a book by an American author, a classic book by an American author that is 500 or more pages. Here's the interesting thing. While there are plenty of classic novels, particularly Victorian ones, Victorian era ones, 1800s, that are considerably more than 500 pages, and some of them are my favorite books ever, like Les Miserables, for example, or The Count of Monte Cristo. Apparently Americans in the 19th century and into the 20th century were not as verbose as their European counterparts, and their books just aren't as long. In fact, a lot of American classics are on the shorter side, as I discovered. Now, some of them are definitely over the 400 page mark. So in hindsight, I probably should have stuck with the 400 mark because that would have opened up more options. Like Little Women, for example, is, I don't think ever crossing the 500 page mark, although, oh yeah, this edition is well over 500. So if you get this annotated edition of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, you are well over 500 pages. So this would be perfect, especially if you've read Little Women before and just want more information as you're reading it. Honestly, if I didn't already have some other plans, I would be reading this one myself because I haven't had a chance to really dig into this one. I've just flipped through it a little bit and read a little here and there, but I would love to read it through in this annotated version. There are also some editions of Work by Louisa May Alcott, which are over 500 pages. So that is another option that you could try. But a lot of Louisa May Alcott's books were either shorter stories, like novella length, like sensational stories that were published in newspapers, or magazines, or they were children's books. So they were necessarily shorter in length. So she doesn't have a lot out there that's long like that. And so I was having trouble finding American authors whose books were long enough to qualify for this prompt. So I have some of the usual suspects to mention to you today. They can't be recommendations necessarily because I have not read them myself. I read Little Women, but not this annotated edition, but I'm assuming it's a fantastic edition. We're gonna go with that. But other than that, I haven't really read most of these books that I'm going to mention to you. So one book that I have read that is often over 500 pages in editions, but my edition is not, is Christie by Catherine Marshall. But I feel like I've mentioned this as a recommendation pretty much every month this year. So I wanted to include some different and more unique options for you, but there may be an edition of Christie that has more than 500 pages. So that's definitely a fantastic option. No matter how you slice it, it's a great book and I'm always ready to recommend it. And of course, when you think about long, sweeping, epic American novels, there is a classic from the 19th century that I'm sure immediately comes to the tip of everybody's tongue, and that is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. So, I'm not saying this is a recommendation because I personally have no intention of reading it ever in my life. I don't like seafaring stories, and I don't particularly love it, even when Victor Hugo does it, bless him. I don't particularly love those parenthetical chapters, those rabbit trails that authors take, where they share various sorts of information related to their story, but not actually directly involving their story. And I've heard, in fact, that a lot of the information that Herman Melville delves into in this story is not only dry and boring, but also inaccurate, because we have learned differently since the time that he wrote it. So I don't know, there's a huge part of me that is like, what's the point? I read the graphic novel, I got the point of the story, so I feel like I'm good. Personally, that's just me. So I know many people would disagree, first of all, with my stance. That's fine. They also would disagree and say that it is a fantastic book. So, maybe this is the year that you should read Moby Dick. Maybe this is your sign. It's not mine, but maybe it's yours. Maybe you should read Moby Dick now. So, throwing that out there. But there are some other books that are also well known. I only have maybe one, maybe two options on here that you're going to be like, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that one, or I hadn't thought about that one. Most of these that I'm mentioning you're going to be like, yeah, I know about that. And either I have read it or I haven't. But I'm very familiar with it. First of all, Gone with the Wind. We all know about that one. I have actually, ironically, visited the author's home and taken a tour of her home, but I have never actually read the book. I've also never watched the movie, if you can believe it. And I really want to remedy both of those things at some point. I just haven't yet. It does interest me as a story, and it interests me as a movie because it's so iconic, and I would love to see it. I feel like I'm not really a very good American if I haven't seen it, but I haven't yet. So it's definitely one on my radar, but I am not going to get to it this summer. And then another one is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. And together with that, The Grapes of Wrath. Both of them are tomes. They're 500 plus pages. And John Steinbeck is a fantastic American author. So far by him, I've only read The Pearl, which I read earlier this year, and which ironically is a novella. So a much shorter story. Packs a punch for sure. And he does seem to have the whole gamut. He has those short stories, he has those novellas that pack a punch, and then he's got these long, sweeping, epic stories that cover large amounts of time and more complex, etc. So East of Eden is on my 50 by 50, and I'm definitely going to read it before I turn 50. Part of me, I wanted to read it this year, and part of me still is interested in reading it this year, but because of the Prairie Trail Readathon, I have a different book on tap for that one. I was thinking East of Eden might go perfectly for this one, and it would, so I highly recommend it for you if you haven't read it yet. I've heard nothing but amazing things about East of Eden. Grapes of Wrath, some people prefer over East of Eden, so both of them are options. If you've read East of Eden maybe, but not Grapes of Wrath, maybe this is the time to read that one. Some people prefer Grapes of Wrath to East of Eden, but they both get really great reviews. So I don't think you can go wrong with that. Personally, great options for this August. One that I learned about more recently, of course, I'm familiar with James Fenimore Cooper as an author. He wrote a lot of books about the American frontier, actually. He lived the American frontier. I read a book, I think it was called Shiloh, by Laurie Benton. So it was a Christian fiction book, but James Fenimore Cooper's father, I believe it was a character in the story. And so we got a glimpse of James himself as a young man in the book. And so that was fun. And it gave me an interest at that point in time to read books by James Fenimore Cooper. One of his most famous ones is The Last of the Mohicans. And that is part of a series of the Leather Stocking Tales, I think they were called. I'll put a different name on there if it was not that. I think it's called The Leather Stocking Tales. Yeah. And there were 5 books, I believe, in this series. And they're all connected in one way or another. I think there is a main character, the Deer Slayer, who shows up in the first book of the series, the Deer Slayer. But they're also able to be read as a standalone, so you don't have to read the whole series, is my understanding. I've not read any of them, but that's what I was reading when I was researching for recommendations. Anyway, the particular one that I am interested in is called The Prairie, and it is actually the 4th book in the series, but it's the first one that he wrote, so oddly enough. And it's what it sounds like. It's about the prairie, and it is over 500 pages. Not all the books in this series are over 500 pages. I think they're all like in the 400-ish range, and some of them go over 500 in some editions, but the Prairie is one of the longer ones and is definitely over 500 pages. So if you were looking for something like I was that also is thematically aligned with the Prairie Trail Readathon, if you were wanting to do that, then that is definitely an excellent option. And several of the books in that series would work, I think, for this book and for different prompts in the reading challenge. So anyway, The Prairie by James Fenimore Cooper is now on my radar and is a great possibility for this August in particular. And then one that I have on my shelf and that I do want to read, but I don't think I'm going to go with it this August, is The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. Henry James was British American, so he lived on both sides of the Atlantic throughout his life. So, and I think he was a dual citizen as well. So he does qualify for this as being an American author. And The Portrait of a Lady, which is his most famous novel, is over 500 pages. So this is definitely an option as well. If you're not trying to do Prairie Trail Readathon material and you are trying to do an American author, this is a great option for you. I don't know too much about the story. Honestly, I'll just read the blurb at the top. The conception of a certain young woman affronting her destiny was how the author described this poignant story of an American princess in Europe. The gay, independent, and beautiful Isabel Archer, on her arrival from abroad, is courted by several eligible men. The account of her involvement in the toils of European guile is generally regarded as the finest book of James' middle period. So, there you have it. Great option. As for me, the book that I am going to pick, I am going to read The Jubilee Trail by Gwen Bristow. I came across Gwen Bristow by accident years ago. I don't know if it was like a free book on my Kindle or something. I stumbled across her book called Celia Garth, which was set in the American Revolutionary War in South Carolina. And I had it on my Kindle for many years before I actually read it. And then when I read it, I was like, why did I wait so long to read this? I really enjoyed it. It was not necessarily a work of literary fiction. It's more of just a vintage book of historical fiction. Gwen Bristow was writing in the 50s, I want to say, and she was writing historical fiction about various events in American history. And my only experience with her is Celia Garth, which overall I enjoyed. Yes, this one was published in 1950. So, this book, Jubilee Trail, is set on the Jubilee Trail, and it is 564 pages, and I think there is an element of romance in this story. I mentioned this before in my recommendations for the Prairie Trail Readathon video, but I'll just mention the blurb one more time. Jubilee Trail is a captivating novel that brings California's history to rowdy, adventurous life. Against the brilliant panorama of one of the most exciting periods in American history, Garnet Cameron, an elegant New Yorker traveling the wild Jubilee Trail with her new husband and a dance hall performer on the lam, learns tragedy, treachery, and despair. And finally, she learns how to meet life without compromise and the real meaning of friendship and love. So, I am looking forward to reading another one by Gwen Bristow and seeing if I have the same enjoyment level as I had when I read Celia Garth by her. So that is my short list of recommendations for fulfilling this prompt in my Reading the Classics challenge. Hopefully one or other of these books sparked your interest and would be one that you would be interested in reading in August. Of course, as usual, in the comments, let everybody know if you have read any of these books on this list and if you would recommend them as well, or if you have any thoughts you want to add about them in addition to what I mentioned, or if you do know some other books by American authors published before 1976 that qualify for this prompt and that you would recommend to other people, please let's expand this list of recommendations, and you can leave your comment, your suggestion in the comments. And finally, as usual, these prompts do not have to be fulfilled by American authors. There are plenty of amazing classic works out there, 500 plus pages that are written by authors around the world, so feel free to read any of them. That was just not the scope of my recommendations video that I was attempting to make today, so there are plenty of options. So two off the top of my head that I mentioned, Les Miserables and The Count of Monte Cristo. Can't go wrong with either one of those. Fantastic books to read. So happy reading in the month of August. Here's to getting in all of those pages.